Well, hello. Welcome to Anchor Conversations. Jason wanted me to be exciting last week, and so I'm going to be as monotone and
Mm,
boring as possible.
this is like we're on NPR or something. Hello,
That's my
everybody.
goal.
How's it going,
Hello.
everyone? Yeah, good. Everybody's doing well.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we got
You can't hear me, but I'm snapping in the background. NPR
trying
snaps.
the NPR trying to be as just we're calm, everyone. This is like news talk radio. We're just gonna talk, or maybe like smooth jazz. Everybody,
Mm.
here's some Kenny G to get you through the evening, and then you play some really bad saxophone music. That's like the Kenny G way. Is that the way that it works?
I don't know, but you had to know this would happen when you said to bring more energy that I would do the exact opposite.
Yeah, I did know that was going to happen, and I should have seen it coming, and I blame myself. I, I blame myself for not getting ahead of it and trying to start this podcast on my own, but like over and above, because I should have seen that coming for sure.
I played you worse than I played Phoebe earlier when we were playing Uno, and I had
Yeah.
everyone convinced that my last card was not a red. And so she changed the color to red,
Uh,
and I won.
nothing like beating your children.
Nothing
Your
like schooling your 6-year-old.
Oh man. I used to do before and after school programs when I was put myself through college doing that. And sometimes you'd be playing these games and they want to play them over. You're like with your kids, you play like a game, they'll still play again. And about the eighth time of playing the same game, you're like, oh man, like I don't know if I can play this whole game again. And so I'd have to resort to being like, be playing Guess Who. I'd have to resort to some point just being like, oh man, I'm so tired of playing Guess Who. So I'd say, hey, does the girl that has glasses have facial hair? And they're like, it's not a girl and she doesn't wear glasses and she doesn't have facial hair. You're like, oh, sweet. So then you're like half like three-quarters of the people on your board, if you ever played that, go down because you're like, no glasses, no facial hair, no girls, perfect. Okay. And they're like, how did you know? Like, I'm just trying to, I'm just trying to get this game over. I've played this game way too many times. Let's play a different one. So similarly, I understand what it's like to try and school 6-year-olds.
It matches my general philosophy when I play anything with my kids, which is no mercy.
Mm.
No mercy, and you will not
Mm.
beat me.
I see where
Which
this is
is
going. I see
which
where this is. That was a man. You didn't telegraph that at all.
no, that was well, it would have been seamless if you hadn't, shown my
No
my
way.
red number
The
seven. You showed Phoebe my
the
red number seven right there.
the best is I wonder how many people heard that and went, "Oh, I know where this is going."
No
The no
one.
mercy
No
comment.
one
Yeah.
saw it. No one saw it
If you
coming.
if you as soon as Tyler said that, if you knew what was coming down, I'd like to hear from you.
No. They were like, he has a green. And I was about to pull out my red number seven and win the game.
That's
But
so
you
good.
outed me.
Yeah, well, what can you do, man? As soon as you said no mercy, I thought, oh man, I know exactly what this is gonna go. This is gonna go into transition time. All
It
right,
is true though. No mercy. No mercy with the kids, which is
no
why we
mercy.
all need Matthew chapter 7 to correct us. Blessed are the
Perfect.
merciful. Although you know what? Maybe I didn't internalize Matthew 7 because it was definitely no mercy at the Uno table tonight. No mercy. Convince them I've got green. Play the red 7. Win the game. Do a little dance. It's dinner time. No mercy. So I needed
Yeah,
Matthew 5-7 tonight.
yeah, you did. Too bad we didn't do this podcast sooner. He would have reminded you about how you should have let Phoebe get a win on that one mercifully.
Yeah, someday. Someday she'll beat me. Actually, she beat me in, before that, to be honest. She did beat
Oh,
me.
okay.
So that was game number 2 and I beat her. But anyways, no one cares about that. Matthew chapter 5 verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Was our beatitude this last week that you preached from. And your big idea was to mirror the mercy that you've received. This encouragement, and you touched on it in your sermon, but the beatitudes are not a list of to dos, but to be's. Um, they are a working out of who we've been made to be. And you hit that hard in this idea of the mercy we've received and how we're to walk that out, not the other way around, not to receive mercy, um, not be merciful so that we will receive it, but be merciful because we have received mercy already, and it's our call to mirror that. And so I thought it'd be good just to kind of revisit some of those themes and maybe dig more in depth on, what does it look like in our everyday lives to do that, to mirror the mercy that we've received. I mean, I think especially in that, to think about that concept of mirroring the mercy we've received, the depth of the mercy. How do we mirror the mercy that we've received in the gospel, the mercy that we've received in Christ, this new life-giving mercy? What does that look like in our lives? What are some of those everyday markers? Kind of speak to mercy, the depth of it, and how it should work out in our lives.
I mean, it's one of those things, I think, if I could, I'll speak really broadly first, and then we can maybe go into a little more specifics. But if you're like me, I think it's one of those things that you know it when you see it, or like when you experience someone who is just a merciful person, they just exude the mercy of Christ. If there's gentleness, it's almost like the fruit of the Spirit is just bubbling out. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Like all those things seem to just be present. You talk to people that it's like it's just a gentle person. I remember like my friend Ted that he preached for us, and we had him on here. I remember Tiffany saying like he just seems like a godly, gentle person, And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what he is. He's full of mercy. Like my interactions with him, even when people disagree with him, I've had, people in rooms be like, "Are you sure that that's the case?" And you go, "Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Let's talk through that, or as I've talked to them about other things, you can kind of feel it from somebody. Slow. So you go to James, slow to anger, quick to listen, quick to hear, slow to speak. Somebody who's just caring for other people, like who has Jesus kind of reverberating out of them when they're interacting with others. When somebody disagrees with them, when they're wrong, is there a gentleness? Is there a kindness? Leaning into loving others where they are. You can definitely see that in terms of people that have the gift of mercy, like mercy ministry giftings, people that are, caring for the poor, have, you know, um, this ministry. I remember there was a buddy of mine, and he's a lead pastor in a church in Charlotte, and they're kind of in downtown Charlotte. And one of the things they do, because there's a lot of homeless population right around them, um, is like I think on Friday nights and Saturday nights they open up a wing of their buildings. Some of the homeless folks can sleep there. They give them food, and just out of a gift of mercy, like there's just a reality of like, hey, I want to help somebody here. I want pity plus action. Like, how do we help them? And I think that when we think about that, and when you interact with somebody like that, you know it. And I think conversely, when you interact with somebody or those who are not merciful, that is not their impulse, you feel that too. You kind of feel the judgment. You walk on eggshells because you're like, I don't want to say something wrong because if I do, I feel like I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm gonna get jumped on. They're gonna take it wrongly. I don't know if I can communicate properly because if I say something a little wrong, they're gonna hold it against me, and so you wind up walking on eggshells around people, and you can feel that too. I mean, I think that my guess is that if I were to ask you, hey, do you like when you talk to people, um, can you tell if people are kind of like have this merciful air about them? For the most part, not all the time, because there's a lot of people that are shady and they're to use, I don't even know what this word means necessarily, but it's just like they're little schmarmy. Maybe they come across one way, or they're really good at being one way in public, but in private, I know there's that kind of thing. But I'm talking about just normal everyday conversations. Like I think for the most part, you can kind of feel it. So that would be I guess how I'd kind of answer that using the Bible and also just generalities. What would you add to that?
Well, I think I like that you mentioned Ted, and I have limited interaction, but I'd agree. But also, I like there's people that I think of, and you said it, you know it when you see it. One of the things as I thought about this, the people that I would say are merciful or really embody mercy. One of the other adjectives for them is I would say they're purposeful. They're really purposeful about what whether it's the relational mercy of forgiveness, of overlooking offense. You can see the purposefulness with which I did ministry for a long time with a guy who was actually quite a few decades older than me. I was friends with his kids. They were my age. So but we did ministry alongside one another, and with some kids who were not Christians, and some of them who had pretty rough backgrounds. And so they could be really offensive, and sometimes intentionally they would try to offend you, and they certainly did with him. And he was, for the most part, he wasn't perfect. I saw him snap at kids at times, but for the most part, he was so purposeful in his responses that he wanted to just be kind and gentle and not return a harsh word with those kids. And then also, so that was like the personal side. And then, the way that he lived his life, you talk about mercy ministry was very intentional. From the place he lived to the things he did, he moved into a poorer part of town to just be a light there, and just kind of he and his wife to kind of give their lives away for that community. And when they first moved in, the community did not really receive them, or some people in the community. They actually had, when the house they moved in was vacant for a while, when it was being renovated, the copper was all stolen out of it. And then they got all that replaced. They moved in, and then someone broke in and installed their electronics. And you could tell the neighborhood, or some in the neighborhood, did not want them there. And their response was to just pour into the neighborhood all the more, just in mercy, to try and undo some of the brokenness, right? Pity plus action, as you talked about. So yeah, I think about people like that, purposeful. What do you think? What are some barriers to us being merciful? Like what are some things for Christians? Because I think a lot of people in our culture, I don't think Christians have the most merciful reputation by and large right now. What are some, and maybe that's unfair. Maybe it's just, the brand of Christianity that I'm familiar with, or, just what I see on the news. I don't know. I feel like mercy and Christianity don't feel like they go hand in hand in the zeitgeist right now. What are some reasons for that, do you think? Why do you think that there's a lack of mercy, maybe, or a perceived lack of mercy?
I mean, I wonder if some of it actually ironically flows from people wanting to show mercy, but they don't know how to do that. So, for example, I think that you can get people with merciful motives who come out instead of with a merciful attitudes, come out swinging and wind up crushing people. Just maybe one example of that would be um, a lot of times you have people that are trying to fight for the unborn, which I think, or the abortion fight, and how to be thinking through that, and um, that in an attempt to be merciful to those that they're trying to protect, they wind up hating others, or in like the extreme cases, blowing up a building, or but I think in the normal everyday cases just wind up hating others, or ignoring other ways to do that. Like I think there's multiple ways to fight the abortion battle. One of them certainly is in the courts, and trying to overturn law. And I think that that's something that we can do. And I think in mercy we do. I think sometimes we can be partisan in that. And we can not see other ways to do that, like providing help for women that are pregnant and trying to figure out how to help them, and instead we just kind of malign those people. Oh, well, they shouldn't be sleeping around. Whatever it might be, like, and I think that can be divided over political lines. I think that can be divided over just how you grew up. It's there. The mercy is in an attempt to be merciful, you wind up being unmerciful to some, while being merciful to others. Like I think that that can happen. And the abortion one's an easy one to call out. I think that can happen in so many different ways. Even let's just say, maybe to use, I was using community groups and huddles. Like, let's say your huddle group, somebody says something offensive. In mercy, you might call the other person in the group and say, "Man, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That was super sad. Man, that person's a jerk. I can't believe they said that. Why would they say that? Do we need to talk to them?" And you wind up gossiping and slandering instead of going just like, so in an attempt to be merciful to the one, you wind up crushing the other. And I don't think that that's necessarily American Christianity. I just think that's just sin at work. Like I think that that's just a twisting of what God's called us to be, and how God's called us to live our lives and how we think through it. Um, you know, I I think that even as we deal with that in the culture, secondarily we do live in a culture that talks about, like I said before, like it's an eye for an eye, and it's, we live in that culture. So I think part of it's also that we're being indoctrinated and discipled by the culture instead of being discipled by the Lord. I mean, how many times in the Beatitudes do we see Jesus saying, blessed are those who go after vengeance once you're wronged, or justice once you're wronged? How, or even the Sermon on the Mount, like so many times it's the opposite of that. It's, hey, if somebody hits you in the face, turn your other cheek to them. That's a really bad paraphrase. Or, go a second mile. If somebody makes you go one, go two. If someone asks for your sandals or your cloak, like give them the other one. Like there's something about like, hey, we want to be leaning into this. I mean, Jesus is the prime example. He he was obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross, because he's merciful. Without that, there isn't. Like he was absolutely wronged, and he entrusted himself to God who judges justly, and that's First Peter, and you can go all throughout the scriptures. But I just think we're not allowing ourselves to be discipled by the scriptures, but because we're so discipled by the culture. So I think that all of that kind of plays a part.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that I've seen in my own life and in, just in ministry that is a barrier to mercy is a fear of being taken advantage of or taken for granted. So this could be relationally, I'm afraid to, well, and usually we wouldn't articulate it this way, but we're holding on to bitterness because if we forgive, we feel like they got one over on us. They got away with something. I see it a lot when we talk about mercy ministry. There's a fear of if I give too much, if I'm too generous, if I'm too nice, they'll take advantage of me. They'll take that for granted. I was reading Deuteronomy 15 last week, and it just struck me as God is setting up in the law this community of mercy, even in the Old Testament. And if you're someone who has that fear, if that resonates with you of being taken advantage of, I'd encourage you to read Deuteronomy 15 because God talks about the canceling of debts. He talks about caring for the poor among you. And he's actually telling the people, be careful that you don't have a wicked thought in your heart that they might take me for granted or they might take advantage of me. This is in chapter 15, verse 9. Be careful of that. He says, give. Don't be stingy because the Lord is your God. Because the Lord will bless you in all your work and everything you do. And I think that there is, a lot of times for us a fear of like, well, if I'm too merciful, then I'm going to capitulate on something and they're going to take advantage of me. And, I was reading Deuteronomy 15 and I was thinking about the cross and how in the cross, it seemed like Jesus lost. He died. He was a criminal on a cross. He was hung on a cross in shame and in rejection by everyone, the state, his friends, everyone, other than a few women who stuck by, right? And John, it seemed like he lost, like he got taken for granted or taken advantage of, or like they got one over on him. But in that moment, he was actually conquering death, right? He was conquering sin. He was opening the door to mercy. And so I think that there is that fear of, well, if I overlook this offense, if I give this money, they're going to take advantage of me. They're going to take me for granted. And I think God's inviting us to say, hold on, I'm God. I'm God. I got this. I hold this in my hands, and I'm calling you to be merciful. Um, so yeah, Deuteronomy 15, read it sometime. I was reading it, never even had really given it much thought, and I was just like, whoa, that's radical that the Lord is talking about forgiving debts and not being aware of how someone might take you for granted when you forgive that debt. Not even having that thought, that wicked thought of, oh no, if it's too close to the seventh year when we cancel debts, I shouldn't do anything here because I might get taken for granted. The Lord's like, no, I'm God. It's okay. Let's be
Yeah.
merciful.
Yeah, that's good. I think and I think what makes it so hard is if even for, I mean, that concept, any of those concepts, it's a really good category to have of being taken advantage of. 'Cause I do think that that is a barrier for us a lot of times. Um, and we do, also have parts of the scriptures that talk about being wise. So wisdom does play a part, but this is why being a Christian is so difficult because we are putting ourselves out there. We do have to be wise. I mean, Jesus tells his disciples, "Hey, look, be wise. As you go out into the towns, be innocent as doves, wise as serpents. Just be wise as you're going to." So, like, we want to be wise, but we also want to, if we're going to err, I think we want to err on mercy. Um, we don't want to be stupid, but so many times like there's a question mark. It's not clear. It's not like there's something that's not super clear. If you have a ministry like my buddy in Charlotte to the homeless, will you get taken advantage of? Yeah, I think that their church has been broken into a few times. Um, but I think that they're still being wise. They're locking all the doors. They're making sure that they are taking precaution. They're not just out there going whatever. Like there are things in place that they're trying to protect. At the same time, their heart posture is mercy. So those things, I think those all go hand in hand, and that's where some of the rubber kind of meets the road on some of these things. It can be difficult.
Yeah, so let's talk more about, that mercy, or excuse me, that wisdom aspect of it, because we had a question texted in that I think really is a wisdom question. And it invites us to ask some of those harder questions and think about those things. So what was sent in is, God is just. When do we show justice versus mercy? Is there a way to check your heart to know which is necessary in each situation? So help us to understand that wisdom, that tension, that nuance of justice versus mercy, or maybe those things aren't opposed to each other. Maybe that's the dichotomy we don't want to set up, but help us think through that.
Yeah, I think that this is where the kingdom of God is. We want it to be super black and white. I mean, it would be so much easier if how God dealt with us was remarkably black and white. Sometimes it's not. And I do think wisdom has to play a part in it. Um, I think that our heart attitude should always be one of mercy, not ignoring the fact that justice needs to be done. So I don't know the exact example that maybe you're thinking of, whoever asked the question, like what specifically you're thinking. Let me give you one where I think they're commingled. I remember reading the book "What's a Girl Worth" by Rachel Den Hollander, about the situation with Larry Nasser. If you remember this years ago, he was the Michigan State gymnastics doctor who wound up essentially sexually abusing, like, I don't even know how many of the gymnasts. I mean, he was a U.S. gymnast, female gymnast doctor. It was definitely dozens, if not hundreds. I don't know how many, but anyway, she was one of them. And they had the courtroom where he got sentenced, and they were speaking against him because they're like, we need to, he shouldn't be out here. He is a danger to society, essentially. Like, we need to put him away. He needs to pay for what he did. Um, and when she had a chance on the stand in the court to address him, she essentially said, "I'm praying for mercy for you, and here's the gospel." And she gave it to him. Her heart wasn't vindictive. It wasn't like, as long as justice is done, I'm good. It was, I want justice to be done because the girls who you um, abused, raped, essentially. um, that you deserve to be in prison. Like you don't deserve to be out here because you are dangerous. You're a dangerous individual. However, her prayer was, and her longing was that he would understand the mercy of God and have a heart change to where he would experience God's mercy and grace and live in the kingdom of God for the rest for eternity. I think so. I think that that's where they mingle in sometimes. I mean, I think that we can have a justice mentality. I'm sorry, a justice reality, especially when it comes to the U.S. court system, and justice should be done. Like if someone's a murderer, they need to pay for their crimes. The Bible talks about, hey, you reap what you sow. Like there is that. Even as we deal with our own sin, you are going to reap what you sow. If you're a gossiper, if you gossip about me and slander me, I can mercifully come back to you in forgiveness. Also wisely say, I'm just not going to put myself in a position like that anymore. I did that. I've done that a few times in my life. A number of years ago, I did that. I just thought, yeah, um, I definitely forgive somebody who I feel like wronged me, pretty significantly wronged me. And I feel like I worked through it. I feel like I talked through it. I feel like forgiveness was there. I feel like I was merciful towards them. But you know what? If that same person came up to me and said, "Hey, can we be friends?" I'd probably say, "You know what? I just I need to be careful with this for me, for my own heart's sake." So I think we can relate, we can talk, but to be deep close friends, like there's wisdom there. I don't think that's justice. Maybe it is. I think that there's wisdom. And I think my heart attitude is leaning into mercy, but at the same time there is wisdom. I don't know if that's answering your question because I don't know specifically of what you're asking. But I do think this is where like um, trusted brothers and sisters in the Lord can help if you have a husband or a wife, or if you have a huddle group that you trust to know some of that without gossiping and slandering. We have to be careful. But even to ask other people, hey guys, like, am I being merciful here? I know that in cases of abuse, I mean, I just talked about Rachel Denhollander, and I addressed it briefly. I mean, very briefly, and I'm sorry for that on Sunday. I was looking at the time, going, man, I gotta our poor kids ministries workers have to there's always that tension. I know that there's many people in that room who have had abuse in their past. So for me, I want to be careful not to say, hey, if you've been abused, you got to have mercy and just go back to your abuser. Like I would never say that. I would say the people that I know in there that have and have talked to have a merciful attitude. I mean, remarkably, probably through many years of therapy and counseling and merciful attitude, but are also wise, going, I don't want to put myself in a position like that. And you know what? Also, a lot of times their eyes are open towards others and they have a little spidey sense when they sense it with somebody else and they keep a distance. That's just wisdom. I don't think that's a lack of mercy. I think that's wisdom. I think that you can have both of those things. I can walk into a room, um, again, with somebody who I feel like did me harm, um, and be fine. Um, but I'm not going to go get a beer with them. I need to say, yeah, I just need to be wise. This is where I think Jesus' words, again, to his disciples as he sends them out, be innocent as doves, wise as serpents. If somebody, if they reject the gospel, shake the dust off your sandals and move to a different town. Like I think that there is a reality to that. So I, I hope that that's a helpful answer. I don't totally know. Let me say one more thing, Tyler, then I want to hear from you. I would say, the other way this question could be asked, which I don't think that the way this is the way it's asked, but the other way it could be asked, um, and maybe this is somebody else listening, is you're trying to find a get out of jail free card for being merciful. I get that because I have that too sometimes where we can think, well, isn't there a place for justice? Because it's really hard to be merciful sometimes to people. And so you just think, well, I'm just going to lean into justice on this one. It's a biblical category too, and I don't want to be merciful. And I would say we have to watch our hearts on that because I think that that's a trap that Satan and the devil wants to actually catch us in. And man, he would take us out on that so quickly. Um, I can't tell you the amount of friends that I've had who I've had to mute on social media because in the name of justice, they are maligning the name of Jesus. in the name of justice trying to stand, quote unquote, stand for biblical truth. I mean, they look like absolute raving lunatics. And I'm not saying that glibly or in a humorous way. Legitimately, I read pastor friends and I just go, you're coming across like you are just the like the worst possible person and I know you personally and you're not like that, but in the name of biblical justice, hey, we got to stand for truth. The world's watching and they're looking at you going, I don't want a part of that. If that's what Jesus is, I don't want a part of that. We do have to stand for truth. Don't get me wrong. You know, I am somebody that is orthodox. I stand for truth. I feel like I stand on many people's shoulders who have stood for truth, and I'm right there with them. But I think our posture in that matters. Like it has to. I think it has to. As are we merciful, standing for truth, wanting and pleading with others who would maybe hold to a line of unbiblical thinking, non-Christians? Are we merciful towards them? People that might believe something different that we'd look at and go, I don't think that that's a biblical concept. We might even say that's heresy. Are we leaning into that mercifully, going, hey, brother, like, or sister, I really think that you're wrong. Can we have a dialogue on this? Because I think you're missing Jesus here. Or are we just going, you're an idiot. You're not even a Christian. Repent. The kingdom of heaven is near. You got to be, you're whatever. And people walk away reeling. I just say that is, I think, using, well, God's just as a weapon as opposed to leaning into mercy. So I don't think that that's the nature of your question. Whoever asked this, I'm not getting that. But I do think as a sidebar, that could be some of our temptation sometimes. So I would just wanted to add that.
Yeah, you could say mercy isn't naive. Mercy isn't naive. So mercy isn't just like, oh man, you think of like the quiet old lady who's just like, smiling while the world's burning around her and whatever. And it's no big deal. There can be a temptation to think, well, mercy means I just got to be naive to all the stuff going on around me, which isn't the case. Jesus is the picture of mercy, and yet Jesus was very clear-eyed about his opponents and their intentions for him and their ultimate actions that would bring about his just brutal death, right? So now that doesn't mean he was any less merciful to them, but he wasn't naive about it either. And so I think that as we, try and balance justice and mercy, that's one category. Is mercy isn't naive. Mercy is clear-eyed and recognizes it. And again, you talked about this on Sunday, but all these beatitudes kind of flow together and they're not in isolation. So the merciful one is also the one who's poor in spirit, who recognizes the brokenness of the world, who recognizes their own brokenness, who all these things work in concert. The other thing, when we talk about justice, we have to be really careful. There's a fine line between wanting to be just and wanting to exact vengeance. And it's really hard for us to tell the difference between those two things as people. I think I've probably mentioned this before, but I am on like a journey as I read through the Bible to find a place in the scriptures where there is a person, a human, who is commended for showing what we would call righteous anger. I know that we can find that in God, and he says justice is mine, but I have yet to see it in a person. So if someone out there knows of that, tell me about it. Because anger in the name of justice is dangerous for us because we're fallen, because we are sinful, we are poor in spirit, we are broken. And so as we think about justice, mercy needs to be clear-eyed. And also, as we think about justice, we need to be clear-eyed about our own intentions. Am I just trying to get vengeance? Am I just mad? Do I just want to take this person out? Do I just want to knock them down a few pegs? Because, and you mentioned, as you talked about, people doing things in the name of justice that really are actually unjust. Because justice isn't just a concept. It's not just a truth. Justice is a holistic idea of God's reality things being made right as God designed them. And so if you're talking about a concept like, defending the life of the unborn, which is a just cause, but you're doing it in a way that is angry, unloving, and unrighteous, you have not met the standard of justice. You only got half the equation. We talked about this a little bit last week with those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. You can't have right thoughts and be a jerk and think that you're chasing after justice. You're not being clear-eyed, right? So I just think, as we try and balance those things, we have to be really clear-eyed about, on the mercy side, am I being clear-eyed about the world and people who've hurt me and things I've been through? Am I clear-eyed about that? And on the justice side, or the vengeance side, am I trusting the Lord, or am I angry? Am I out for vengeance? And on both sides of that, I just think you got to be honest about where you're at and where your
Yeah.
heart's at.
And again, this is one of the things that makes this one in particular difficult. This is kind of in a second wave here in the Beatitudes, but I think the early ones, it's a self-judgment. I think in a lot of ways, this one, other people are judging us because that, again, you feel it. You can see it. You just go, man, I'm not getting the flavor of mercy. Like you can sense it. Like there's something about it that it's apparent to others. It's like when sometimes you are eating food or whatever and you have something on your face, or you drink a milkshake and you have it, someone's like, hey, you got something. Like it's that. You just like sometimes we don't even see it, but it's clear to everybody else. And so that's why I think living in community groups, huddle groups, like I think that's super important, because I think that the more you're known, the more you're going to be able to have people speak into your life and help you kind of understand some of those things and just grow.
Yeah, I hate to do a really short answer, but we've talked around this, but just real quick, we did have a question also texted in about the difference between being a doormat or being even abused versus mercy. Any thoughts on that? Just real quick, we got about 2 minutes here. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we got 2 minutes. If you have a good answer, you can give it. I'll try. I mean, I did address it earlier. I think that's where wisdom comes in. I don't think God calls us to be a doormat. We can go to Exodus and look at and Deuteronomy even, and talk about what Moses gave to the people, about even giving women permission, as he's thinking about divorce. Like the reason that he allows divorce is because he's nervous that women are going to be stuck in this relationship and like then they're being abused. I mean, they're being wronged. And so he allows it. That's God allowing it out. That's not his plan, but sin came in and did that. I don't think he ever calls us to be a doormat. I do think, though, he calls us to be self-sacrificial. So if you're talking about being abused, get out of that. Like no equivocations. If you're being abused, you get out of that. God is not calling you to stay in an abusive relationship. You have to get out of that. So there's no equivocation. There's no buts on that. I just period. Like that's those things. Biblical godly mercy includes wisdom, love, grace. And there's an allowance for things in divorce, for example, if we're talking about marriage, even with abuse. Like I'd be a proponent, if somebody is being abused, that's grounds for divorce for me. Abandonment, you could talk about the idea of abandonment in the scriptures, even going back into what Moses' law. I think that you could make some arguments from that. So I would say godly mercy has wisdom categories, and I think abuse would fall into the wisdom categories.
Yeah, and I won't add much to that other than you mentioned doing that in community. Your pastors are safe people. If you feel like you could be in that spot, or a counselor would be a good person to talk to. Yeah, so if you feel like you could be in that spot, reach out.
So we have the Care and Counseling Fund.
That is why. So yeah, we
Yeah.
want to be merciful, right?
Yep, that's right.
All right, thanks for your
Everybody,
thoughts today, man.
yeah, looking forward to seeing you all Sunday.
See you Sunday.